You might be wondering what is dry needling, how it compares to acupuncture, and would it be helpful for me? Well, we're going to talk about that and some of the conditions that dry needling would be helpful for. Welcome. My name is Jeff Peterson, and I wanted to welcome you to our office and talk about dry needling. We at Peterson Physical Therapy have a promise that we make to each other, we make to our referral sources and our patients with unconditional positive regard to meet people where they are and help them move forward. So in order to help you move forward, we've got several different tools in our toolbox to do that, and one of those tools is dry needling. And I get a lot of questions about, well, what is dry needling and why is it called dry needling and is it acupuncture? So I want to talk about that a little bit today. First of all, it is not acupuncture. Acupuncture is practiced by trained acupuncturists. And they use the same monofilament needles to insert into the tissue of the body, but they choose very strategic points based upon Chinese medicine. And they're often called Qi points. Unlike a physical therapist who practices dry needling, the points that we choose are very specific to the anatomy and usually are located in and around the area of dysfunction or pathology. The second reason it's called dry needling is to differentiate it from wet needling. So in wet needling, I'm going to show you a hypodermic needle. So if you've ever had an injection, a physician or a dentist or a physician's assistant or a nurse will give you an injection with one of these hypodermic needles. And you can see these needles are really quite thick. They have a beveled edge on them. The monofilament needles that we use, and these are always sterilized. We have these, we don't give injections as physical therapists, but we have these around because oftentimes we'll inject medicine into an electrode to put that through the body. But the monofilament needles, I'm going to show you one of these that I already have open. This one is not sterilized, but normally the ones that we use are sterilized. And you can see this one here is very thin. And when they say monofilament, because it's a solid needle. It's not like the O of the hypodermic needle. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put my glasses on. And I'm going to show you, let me try to get this started here, that you can actually insert the acupuncture needle or the needle that we use for dry needling right into the hollow end of a hypodermic needle. So it's called dry needling to differentiate it from a wet needling or injection, and also to differentiate it from, even though we're using the same needle, from acupuncture. Acupuncture treats many different conditions, and people have had great success with it, just like people have had great success with dry needling. But dry needling oftentimes is called intramuscular manual therapy by physical therapists. Physical therapists who practice dry needling all have training in anatomy, biomechanics, pathophysiology, physiology, and then also training in specifically the safe insertion of needles to help with certain pathologies. And what can dry needling help with? It can help with a shoulder tendonitis, it can help with back pain, headaches, plantar fasciitis we do a lot, osteoarthritis of the knee. So it can be used with just a wide array of musculoskeletal conditions. So it's something to look into. The other thing that I want to say is that dry needling is not actually an alternative treatment. It's been practiced for years, and there's a lot of research on how helpful it is to insert needles into the body. As a matter of fact, dry needling came about quite by accident, where physicians were injecting trigger points. Those are tender and tight points in a muscle. And what happened was they would have a control group, and then they would have the medicine group, and they would want to compare the results. And they were finding that sometimes just the insertion of the needle into that tender point was giving people relief. And that's when they started doing research and saying, hey, this is really helpful when you have these musculoskeletal conditions if we just use the needle. One of the big questions we have is, does dry needling hurt? Well, not as much as, and I'm going to show you what we do with the needles. but not as much as you might think. With the hypodermic needle, because it has a beveled edge, that whole edge is penetrating the tissue and creating damage. And if you've ever given blood or had an injection, they have to put that cotton ball on there and tape it on there for quite a while, and most of the time you're left with a bruise. With dry needling, occasionally you have a bruise, and occasionally we hit a little capillary and you have a little bit of bleeding, but it goes away in seconds. Usually 10 to 20 seconds, the bleeding is gone completely. And what we do is we use these sterilized needles, and we're going to pretend that this is somebody's arm, and they have a little stopper here. I'm going to show you that. And what we do is we tap that needle right in, and then we work it into the tissue. Now, some therapists and acupuncturists do it. In some states, it's athletic trainers can also do it, might work that needle around into several different points. And that's one way to stimulate that tissue to help it heal. And when I talk about the mechanisms for how needles work, I'll describe that a little bit more. And then another way we can do it is to get some tissue, what they call some transduction of that tissue by twisting the needle. That's a little less painful, but it literally wraps the tissue around that needle and stimulates it. So what are the mechanisms? Well, one, the needle inserted into that area creates microtrauma. That microtrauma creates a circulation and a chemical response to that trauma and helps assist with the healing. The other thing that happens is it stimulates the nervous system through the spinal cord up to the brain, and you get a release of chemicals that are pain inhibitory and anti-inflammatory. So there are several mechanisms that have been well measured determining how dry needling can help. Is it safe? It's very safe. There are some areas in the body, in and around the lung field, that therapists need to be really careful about, but therapists are trained and understand the anatomy to stay away from that. There are some major arteries and nerves that we need to be careful to stay away from. But most of the time, the biggest side effect is some local bruising, maybe a little bit of bleeding that lasts for a few seconds. But what typically happens is people feel a sense of relaxation and sometimes even weakness because the muscles are so relaxed. But that's actually the sign that the needles are working. So it's a really safe alternative to other things that we do. It's a safe adjunct, because any therapist who is going to use dry needling is also going to be doing a comprehensive evaluation, looking at your mobility, prescribing an exercise program, maybe adding some stretching or some manual therapy. So it's always part of a comprehensive treatment plan, and it can be one of those things that gets you over that hump of being in pain for a long time, especially if you've been in chronic pain. So ask your therapist about it. If this has been helpful to you, by all means, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, or contact us through our website.